Hello everyone and welcome to Scary Time. I'm Greg, host and curator of all the shows on the Indie Drop-In Network. Every week I find a scary or paranormal episode I think you will love from an independent podcast creator. If you like what I do here and you want to support the show, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Indie Drop-In. Today's episode is from Odd Encounters. From alien abductions to demonic possessions, this is Odd Encounters, and these are their stories. If you like today's episode from Odd Encounters, make sure to check the show notes for links to subscribe and follow on social media. Enjoy the show.
Begin.
If you're a fan of horror movies, then you've probably seen the 1973 film The Exorcist. In the film, 12-year-old Regan McNeil is consumed by a demonic presence known as Pazuzu, and when her parents seek the help of two local priests, they perform a grueling exorcism to expel the demonic presence. What few people know is this chilling movie is based on a real exorcism that lasted 3 weeks. It was performed on a young boy by the name of Roland Doe. Roland was always known to be well-mannered and kind, but that all changed when in a fit of rage, he brutally stabbed a priest, effectively maiming him for life. Roland slowly became angrier and more vile towards his parents, and when they had nowhere else to turn, they sought the help of a local priest who documented the entire encounter. This is Odd Encounters, and this is the possession of Roland Doe. In 1949, the New York Times published a story about a 14-year-old boy who was given the pseudonym Roland Doe, and in this article, the author describes the possession and exorcism of Roland. While Roland's story may have inspired The Exorcist, it is far different than the Hollywood retelling. Father Bowdern, the priest who performed the exorcism, did keep a detailed journal of the exorcism over a 3-week period, and this is one of the most well-documented cases of a demonic possession. The journal was kept locked away in a vault until 1990, when author Thomas Allen was given a copy to reference for his own book. Allen conducted his own interviews with 40 different witnesses to the various stages of Roland's possessions, and their stories corroborated the journal entries. According to the journal entries of Robert Bishop, the story that unfolds is the most intense possession he has ever witnessed. To protect the identity of Roland and his family, they have been given pseudonyms. The first incident happens on January 15th of 1949 in Roland's home in Maryland. Roland and his grandmother are at home when they hear a loud dripping noise and decide to investigate. They come to the conclusion it must be a leaky pipe, but that night a drastically different noise rattles through the floor. The sound of loud scratching, an almost frantic kind of scratch, echoes throughout the hallways of the house. It was coming from underneath of his grandma's bed, but when they looked they didn't see anything under there and chalked it up to being rodents in the floorboard. After the exterminator that they had contacted couldn't find anything, Roland's dad rips up the floorboards to lay poison underneath. That night, the scratching continues, but this time it's louder, and no one in the house can sleep. This mysterious scratching noise happens at the same time of night for 11 days before it moves to Roland's room. Even stranger is that Roland now hears what sounds like footsteps creaking around the edges of his bed as if someone or something is pacing back and forth. Eventually his mother, either out of desperation or curiosity, decides to try and contact whatever this is. Recently, her sister Helen had passed away and they were extremely close. His mother must have expected a response and hoped that if it were someone, it would be her. After no response, she gives up. Roland had become extremely close to his Aunt Helen, who would visit whenever she could. She was a spiritualist who would attempt to contact the dead, and during the winter of 1948, she had taught Roland how to use a Ouija board. I wanted to get a better understanding for demonic presences, and so I sought some insight from my friends at the Haunted UK podcast.
Demons can manifest themselves in not only different ways, but also through many different doorways. The doorway is simply a route into our world, and also more importantly, into ourselves. Many cultures and religions have demons firmly playing their part in the battle between good and evil, ranging from the fallen angel Lucifer to the many demons that inhabit the underworld of ancient Mesopotamia to the Wendigo in Native American culture. All of these demons and many, many more can be, allegedly, extremely dangerous if unleashed into our consciousness. They will take over, burrowing themselves into the very heart of what makes an individual human. Many demons will seek to destroy what they possess, gradually starving and breaking apart the vessel which they have chosen, and then, like a parasite, they will move on. Doorways can exist in varying formats, from spells and rituals which can summon a demon into our world, to items which have been cursed or have absorbed a demonic spirit. Take the famous Dybbuk box, for instance. Again, allegedly possessed by the spirit of a lost soul, which is what a Dybbuk is. In the case of Roland Doe, the doorway could have been opened up by the use of an Ouija board. Also known as a spirit board or talking board, these items were hugely popular with mediums in the 1800s as a way to communicate with the dead. But what would come through as a deceased loved one or friend trying to make contact with the living wasn't always strictly the truth. According to many mediums, demons are always waiting to be invited into our existence, and they will use any connection possible to take the opportunity to possess a human soul. There are many written accounts of a Ouija board users not correctly closing the door, enabling demonic spirits to access our world. As soon as they find a suitable vessel, they will attach themselves to it, wreaking havoc in the life of that person and also the lives of anyone close to them. There are also accounts of demons mimicking the dead, who are coming through to the living via Ouija boards and gaining passage into our reality. Seasoned mediums and spirit board users can quickly tell when there is evil about to try to cross over into our world, and most of the time, they can stop the process before it can gain traction. But some cases slip through the net. Famed demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren documented many claims of cases of demonic possession and, in some instances, said they weren't able to rid the spirit from its chosen vessel. In these cases, and similar ones all over the world, it's at this time when an exorcist is called upon. Typically, an exorcist is calling upon the power of God and Jesus Christ through prayer and specific scriptures to drive out the demon or demonic spirit. Other items can be used by an exorcist to help aid this process, such as blessed water, and one of the most seen items in movie and TV dramatizations, the cross. Exorcisms can go on for weeks, and unfortunately, many have resulted in the deaths of the possessed individuals due to starvation, dehydration, and other physical injuries which they have suffered throughout the exorcism process. Over the last 100 years, our understanding of the workings of the human mind has grown tremendously, and it is completely plausible that most cases of demonic possession can be explained by varying degrees of mental illness. Conditions such as dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, and even epilepsy can seem to many to be evidence of possession, and it's been proven on many occasions that once the person in question has been seen, diagnosed, and then received treatment by a medical professional, their lives revert back to a level of normality. But what about the cases that exist that defy these logical explanations? Well, maybe they're real. Or maybe we just haven't found a suitable and acceptable reason for them yet. A huge thank you to Alex at the Odd Encounters podcast for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this episode. Keep up the great work, and to all the listeners out there, keep tuning in for more great content.
After gaining this new insight from Steve at Haunted UK podcast, it was clear to me that Roland was about to make an irrefutable mistake. When his aunt died, Roland's first thought was to grab his Ouija board, head to his room, and try to contact Aunt Helen as soon as possible. He tried again and again, but made no progress. That is until one night when the creaking footsteps started to keep him awake at night. His mother decided to call out, "Helen, is that you? If so, knock 3 times." A deafening silence engulfed the room, and after a brief moment, both Roland and his mother felt the room go cold, and 3 loud knocks came from the floor beneath them. Then the scratching sound returned, but this time it was coming from inside the mattress. Roland jumped when he felt something moving inside of the mattress, and as he landed on the ground, the entire bed began to shake violently. Almost as quickly as it happened, it came to a dead stop. For some reason, his mother doesn't mention the incident again, but Roland's life is becoming more chaotic by the day. It begins with a Bible flying off of his nightstand and cracking his wall, to a few days later, while he is sitting in class, his desk begins to shake violently and slam into the nearby desks. His mother thought maybe he was acting out after the loss of his dear Aunt Helen, but that still wouldn't explain the bed shaking violently when no one was touching it and the other weird incidents around the house. Roland's parents took him to a psychiatrist and a doctor before visiting a Lutheran minister. Both the psychiatrist and doctor told Roland's parents that aside from being a little high-strung, he seemed like everything was normal. When they met with the Lutheran minister, he prayed for Roland and his family, but this only made the problem worse. On the night of February 17th, Roland and his mother stayed the night at the minister's house so that he could see firsthand what was happening. The minister wasn't convinced that Roland was really experiencing these things, so he decided to have Roland sleep on the floor on top of 2 blankets. This would definitely expose the hoax if there was one. Or so he thought. At 3 a.m. that night, Roland begins to slide across the floor slowly while he is still dead asleep. The minister is watching in shock as Roland slides halfway underneath one of the nearby beds and begins to slam up and down without ever waking up. In the morning, Minister Schultz still has no answer for what he's just witnessed and tells Roland's mother that they will need to see a Catholic priest. The attacks are now beginning to get more physical. In addition to weird scratching noises and beds slamming around, Roland is now waking up covered in red scratches and welts on his body. With nowhere else to turn, his mother contacts Father E. Hughes. When they all meet for the first time, Father Hughes immediately notices that the room has now gotten ice cold and Roland has an overwhelming aura of evil around him. During the next visit, Roland stands up and in flawless Latin he says, "O Father of Christ, you know that I am the devil. Why are you bothering me?" Without wasting any time, Father Hughes requests permission to perform an exorcism on grounds of a diabolical possession. The instructions to perform an exorcism are contained in a book called the Roman Ritual. Every priest has a copy, and fortunately few ever have to use that section. After referencing this book, Father Hughes has Roland admitted to a local Catholic hospital. Maybe, just maybe, he could have a fighting chance with the help of nuns and the orderlies. Unknown to Hughes, the book states that the exorcising priest should be of wise years and in good moral standing, meaning that he was not the right man to perform the exorcism. On March 6th of 1949, Father Hughes attempts his own brief exorcism and quickly comes to realize this was far more dangerous than anyone could have expected. Roland's arms and legs were completely strapped down, but in the middle of the priest reciting Latin prayers, Roland manages to wriggle one of his hands free, and by some mysterious bout of strength, he rips one of the bed springs out of the mattress. He turns to Father Hughes and begins viciously attacking him with the spring. Father Hughes is now on the ground with a large gash spanning down his left side from his shoulder to the top of his wrist. While laying on the ground, writhing in pain, the nearby nuns manage to subdue Roland and strap him back down. After receiving 154 stitches, Father Hughes refuses to attempt another exorcism. Word is now circling in the Catholic Church. Through a twist of fate, the story ends up in the hands of Robert Bishop. He agrees to perform the exorcism under one condition. All of the events that would unfold during this exorcism would remain a tightly kept secret. The book did mention that the exorcising priest should be of good moral standing and piety. This left no better option than Father Bowdern, who was a former army chaplain and an orderly since the age 17. Before leaving for this perilous journey, Father Bowdern says a quick prayer and fasts for the day. Just after 10 p.m., Roland is laying in his bed with Father Bowdern standing over top of him, calling out in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. He even calls on the Virgin Mary and the Archangel Michael. He has called on every holy deity he can think of to stand by him and expel the evil that was possessing this poor soul. Suddenly, Roland's bed begins shaking as Father Bowdern methodically is chanting Latin prayers. This goes on for 2 hours before Bowdern turns to the strongest prayers in his scripture. These prayers call out the demon directly and are used in only the most extreme cases of demonic possession. "I command you, unclean spirit, leave this body in the name of God." Bowdern spoke with purpose and resolve in his voice, but Roland began screaming in pain and ripped open his shirt. Right on the middle of his chest appeared 3 welts, and they were causing Roland a tremendous amount of pain. Every time Father Bowdern said God or anything referencing the Holy Spirit, more welts would appear on Roland's writhing body. Continuing the ritual, Bowdern demanded the demon speak its name. Suddenly, a set of bloody scratches showed up on Roland's stomach, reading the word hell. Bowdern asked the demon when it would leave this young boy, and then the word go shows up on Roland's thigh. Just below these bloody scratches in the Roman numeral X, or 10, could it mean 10 days, weeks, years? Father Bowdern didn't know, but he wasn't going to give up until Roland was free from this evil. Bowdern gathered himself and began commanding the demon to leave again, but Roland is now thrashing so violently that 4 adults have to hold him down to the bed. This went on for hours, and around 5 a.m. Father Bowdern commands the demon to leave and things go silent. The house is no longer filled with the screams of torment, but a silence that gives everyone just enough time to collect themselves. Roland began to sway back and forth while speaking softly. Gradually, he got louder and faster until he was frantically speaking gibberish. The exorcism lasted another 2 hours before Roland fell into a deep trance-like sleep. Father Bowdern left the Doe residence, and after the following Thursday, he returns. Roland immediately falls into a trance and begins thrashing violently. Bowdern is now reciting the same prayers he did on the last visit. To no avail, Father Bowdern has attempted several exorcisms on Roland, and this same pattern repeats itself for the next 9 days. On the 10th day, Father Bowdern is reciting his prayers while Roland is spitting on him and thrashing violently when everything comes to a halt. Roland is now completely conscious and the house is quiet once again. Bowdern was sure that he was successful this time. But the demonic presence that was consuming Roland was merely hiding. The following night, as Roland is getting ready for bed, he complains to his mother that he is feeling sick. He begs for everyone to come upstairs with him, and so the whole family shuffles up the stairs and into his room. As Roland is sitting on the edge of the bed, he begins to say, 10 days. I will leave after 10 days, but will return in 4. If you remain Catholic, I will leave, but if you do not, then Roland will suffer for eternity. Bowdern had been attempting to exorcise this demonic entity for 10 days now, and Roland begins to act like himself. However, 4 days later, exactly when the demon said it would return, Roland begins to act how he was a few days ago. It now made sense to Father Bowdern. He needed to baptize Roland as a Catholic for the exorcism to work. On the way to the church, Roland fell into a trance again and began shouting before grabbing the steering wheel of the car and trying to crash it off of the road. His uncle slams on the brakes just before crashing, and Roland immediately turns to his mother to strangle her. His father and his uncle have to hold him down for the remainder of the ride. Things would only get harder inside of the church. It took 4 attempts at baptizing and 6 attempts at communion for Roland to be ready. After several long hours of praying with Roland, a new Roman numeral appeared on his leg. 18. April 18th. That was 16 more days from now, and Father Bowdern wasn't sure if he was strong enough, but was determined to help Roland. For the next 16 days, Roland and Father Bowdern spent a few hours a day together, and on the 16th day, Roland was admitted to a Catholic hospital. Bowdern made one last attempt to expel the demon. He spoke calmly in English this time, and after he said his final commandment, Roland relaxed. Roland has an expression of peace on his face, and was no longer thrashing and screaming. Instead, he relaxed his shoulders and let out a long exhale. Father Bowdern, exhausted and weary, sat with a slight grin on his face as he knew he had just expelled the demon and saved poor Roland's soul. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Odd Encounters. A huge thank you to my friend Steve at Haunted UK Podcast for contributing such amazing content to this episode. If you love paranormal stories like the one on tonight's podcast, Haunted UK Podcast has the stories that may just send a chill up your spine. Whatever platform you stream on, be sure to look for Haunted UK Podcast. If you enjoyed tonight's episode of Odd Encounters and want to support the podcast, leave a 5-star review or tell your friends about it. You can follow Haunted UK Podcast on Instagram at Haunted UK Podcast for more amazing content, and Odd Encounters on Twitter at Odd Encounters. Thank you again, and I can't wait to see you on the next episode of Odd Encounters.
Thanks again for listening to Scary Time by Indie Drop-In Network. Check out all of Indie Drop-In shows at indiedropin.com. If you would like your show featured, reach out to us at Indie Drop-In on all social media or go to indiedropin.com.